Welcome once again to Comrades in Arms. This program is a series of interviews done at Branch 98 of the Royal Canadian Legion at Kingston, Nova Scotia. And the purpose of these interviews is to highlight the careers of our veterans that served in Canada's armed forces. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to interview a man whose name is Joseph L. Maloney. Now, I hope that over the past months I've become a friend of Joe's. And Joe served in the American Air Force. He's a Canadian. He lives in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. And he has been a Canadian for quite some time. But during the war, he served in the American Air Force. He was a tail gun Charlie. And his amazing story, I want to let him tell it, of course, but it begins like this. He says, "My crew left Norfolk, Virginia on December 7th, 1943 on the Royal Mail Liner Andes with 5,000 men aboard." So you were on your way to the war.
We were on our way to the war, but we really didn't know where we were going. We just got on the old boat and left. And we crossed the Atlantic. We knew we were doing that. Mm-hmm. And about halfway across, we encountered a German submarine, and which added one day to our trip. And we left on the 7th, and we arrived in Casablanca on the 15th of December.
So you didn't go to Europe, you went to Casablanca.
We went to Casablanca, where we were in an infantry camp for 3 weeks. From there, we were flown to Mandura, Italy, which is in the southern part, way down near the heel. And we flew 2 or 3 missions out.
Now, hold on a minute, Joe.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Now, you were in, when you arrived, your plane was there, or you picked up your plane there?
We picked up our plane there.
Yeah, which was a what?
A B-24.
A B-24.
J, which was a latest model. And there was 2 crews arrived at the same time. There was 2 planes available. One was an old clunker that was worn out with the war.
Oh, yeah.
And the other one was a brand new one, and our pilots flipped coins for it.
And
and we won the good one. And then we started flying from there.
Yes, yes. And you did a number of missions from there.
We did 2 or 3 from Mandura, and then which had an old steel mat runway, and we were all happy to leave that. And we went to Lecce, Italy, which is right on the down at the heel, where we had a modern, of those days, airport with concrete runways and such and such.
So
and we flew the rest of our missions from there.
Yeah, you did your missions from there.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, did you have any exciting ones? Well, they're all exciting.
They're all exciting.
Yes.
Yeah, we flew some of the famous ones of the time. We flew Anzio, and it's just amazing. I watched it on TV 2 or 3 nights ago. And we flew Casino. We went to Klagenfurt, Vienna, Sofia, Romania. And we joined an old time bomb group that was originally in the 9th Air Force, and they flew out of North Africa. And they flew the original Lois, the oil fill raid, low level. I didn't fly that, but we learned, even though I didn't fly it, we learned a lot from it, mistakes that were made, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and you had a lot of attacks, did you, in your position in the as tail gunner?
Well, the tail gunner was normally considered in the hot spot of the ship.
Yeah.
And most of your attacks would come from the rear.
Yeah.
But it's ironic, I never got to fire at an airplane, enemy airplane, until the day that we were shot down. Oh, really? And then I shot the same airplane down that basically shot us down.
You did?
Oh, yeah. When he went by us, he came from the front, which was a most unusual way for them to attack.
Yeah.
And we were bombing Steyr, Austria this day.
Yeah.
And he came from the front, and he was climbing. And it's most unusual, but that's what he did, and he fired rockets at us.
Oh.
And he took 3 of our 4 engines out.
Oh my
And
God.
then he dove straight down on the deck
Yeah.
to avoid our firepower. And he came back up again. And I watched him all this way.
Oh yeah.
And I never got a shot at him when he
Yeah.
was going by the first time.
Yeah.
But then he came back toward our airplane from the rear,
Yeah.
and he was flying straight at us, a little bit high. And my radio operator that was in the top turret, he
Yeah.
started firing,
Yeah.
and I didn't fire.
Yeah.
And all the German did was drop down, so the bullets are going over top of him.
Oh yeah.
And at that time, I knew we were going down and we're desperate.
Yeah.
And I sat with my guns in a stowed position until he was probably out about 600 or 800 yards.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he could see my guns were down because I could see his guns.
Yeah.
And he must have thought I was hit.
Oh yeah.
And he kept coming. And
Yeah.
then I raised my guns in one movement,
Yeah.
and I fired at him, and
Yeah.
I could see smoke coming from his left wing.
Uh-huh.
And then the canopy opened, and it was a Ju-88,
Yeah.
which was a fighter bomber. He was used more for bombers than fighters.
That's Junker.
Junkers,
Yeah,
you know,
Junker.
88.
Yeah.
And the canopies went off, and 2 men came out with a parachute, and just right after that, the left wing peeled off and
Disintegrated. Yeah,
disintegrated, and the plane went down.
Oh. Well,
I
you
looked
got
at
him
the
least.
2 men going down.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I told you that I learned from the Ploesti
Yeah.
people, is that they would lecture us by the hour.
Yeah.
If a German goes down, don't shoot him. And
Oh.
shoot. And in turn, he will not shoot you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so in turn, I didn't shoot them.
Yeah.
I said a prayer for them, and they
Yeah,
went
yeah.
down. And we limped along out of
Yeah.
formation.
Yeah.
When we were hit, immediately we went out of formation. There was, at that time, there was a correspondent on the plane just ahead of us that wrote, he was a reporter for the Washington Star newspaper in Washington, D.C. And he wrote of our mission that following week for his paper, and I have a copy of it at home. But he tells that immediately we hit, we peeled off to the left and started down. And he said, I thought you all had it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, one would.
but we had exceptional pilots. They got the ship under control. And I've also been in contact with the pilot that was in that lead plane, and he said the same thing. He said, when you fell out of formation, I thought you all had it.
Yeah.
But they got us leveled out after a while. We were limping along on one
Yeah.
engine, and if you read the book,
Yeah.
B-24 will not fly.
On
One engine.
No, yeah.
But it flew for 45 minutes.
Did it?
And we
Yeah.
had always agreed that if we were hit, we were going to try to get to Switzerland, where we had been interned and not a prisoner of war.
Yes, yeah.
So we tried to head for Switzerland, but the mountains were coming too fast and we were too low,
Oh,
so we
yeah.
couldn't get over. So the next thing we wanted to do is go to the Adriatic.
Yeah.
And we thought if we could ditch in the water, we could send a emergency message out,
Yeah.
and maybe a boat could pick us up.
All right.
Which, as I think of it after, is scary because I didn't swim.
Oh.
So anyway, we didn't make it.
Yeah.
And we got down probably about a half hour. We limped along. And my pilot called in and he said, there's an airplane ahead of us, the B-24 as well. And he said, he's out of formation as well. We're going to try to catch him. And maybe we have firepower of 2 airplanes instead of 1.
Yes. Yeah.
Which we tried to do, but didn't make it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the pilot came on, and he said, "There's a string of Me-109s, which were German fighter planes,
Yes.
circling it, and they were giving the people in the plane ahead of us time to get out.
Oh.
So when they counted 10 shoots came out of it, they used the plane for target practice.
Oh my.
And they let the plane go
The
down.
plane go down, but the crew.
The crew all went down in
Yeah,
parachutes,
yeah, fine.
but they didn't shoot them. They didn't bother them.
Yeah.
So then he called and he said, in the meantime, we were trying to throw anything out, ammunition, flak vests, anything to lighten the plane,
yeah.
make it lighter if we could,
Yeah.
which I guess didn't mean anything, but it does feel good.
Yeah, you were trying something anyway.
It's rather than just sit there and wait for it,
Yeah.
you were doing something. And he called on the intercom, and he said, they're coming for us, get ready to bail out.
Oh.
So I'd always had a pact with my pilot that I would clear the back and call in so that he wouldn't ride forever thinking, are they clear or are they not clear? So our waste window gunner tried to jump out the waste window, and the slipstream pinned him against the frame of the airplane. He couldn't get in or out.
Yeah.
So I came back out of the tail turret, and in the meantime, the person in the ball turret had come up out of that.
Yeah.
We pulled him in, and he made one dive, and out the hatch he went.
Oh.
Then the ball turret gunner went out as well.
Yeah.
And I called, and in the meantime, the front was trying to clear. And when we were hit, normally the bombardier, the nose gunner, and the navigator would have gone out the nose wheel door. But that jammed, so they couldn't do that.
Oh, dear.
They had to crawl back to the Bombay, which they did. And on the way, my bombardier, Clark Fetterman, his ripcord pulled. So when he got to the Bombay, he had his arms full of parachute.
Oh, my God.
And he stood there and he said, I can't jump, I can't jump. And the radio operator said, you've got to jump, put his foot in his back and pushed him out.
Oh.
Because the plane was going down.
Yes,
You had no
course,
choice,
no
really.
choice,
And then the rest of them cleared themselves.
Yeah, how did he make out, by the way?
He made out fine.
Did he?
Yep.
It opened, the chute opened.
Chute open, and
yeah.
And we, in the meantime, I cleared the, called in and told my pilot the back was clear. And I sat down at the hatch, put my feet out, and all you have is wind going by you about 150 miles an hour, you know. And I was afraid. It was 2 days before my 21st birthday.
Oh.
And I said, I'm never going to live to be 21. I'll never have a legal drink. And but anyway, I did go out, and you pull the ripcord, and the yank, when that tightens up, is just terrific. I thought I had a voice change.
Oh, yeah.
But in the meantime, the pilot, the co-pilot came back, and he jumped out of the parachute, out of the Bombay. And my pilot came down, and he was ready, and he remembered he didn't have his smokes. So he crawled back up to the cockpit.
Oh, to get his cigarette.
Got his cigarettes. And then he came back, and he jumped out. And as we were going along, we didn't really know where we were, except that we could see a town down below. And we thought, well, we'll try to jump into this town or close to it, thinking there'd be German troops there. And we'd be taking a prisoner of war instead of... And the reason we wanted to do this was because back in Italy, we had heard reports of airmen being picked up, and they would have 3 or 4 round holes through their Mae Wests. And for a long time, they couldn't figure out what it was. And they came out in the farmland, and the farmer would put a pitchfork through them, kill them, and throw them in a manure pile anyplace.
Sure,
So we didn't want that.
No, I could see that.
So we tried to hit this town, and we know now that the town was Nova Mesto, but at that time we had no knowledge of what it was. And we bailed out, and we were coming down into the town, and all of a sudden there was a change of wind, and it blew us south. And we came down in a no man's land between the Germans and the partisans. They were both coming out. The Germans are coming.
Now, hold on. What country was this?
This was Slovenia.
Slovenia,
which is then part of Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia, okay.
It's hard in the corner. It touches Austria and it touches Italy.
Okay, we got you. All right. Sorry to interrupt, but you're so familiar with it, you know.
Yeah, I know. I realize that.
Yes, okay.
Stop me anytime.
Yeah, right.
And so we, the wind took us and blew us, and we didn't realize this till 40, 50 years later. But anyway, we came down in a no man's land, and the partisans were coming out from their surroundings trying to pick us up, and the Germans were coming out to pick us up as well. And when I landed, I had to slip my parachute. I was coming down on top of a little small old farmhouse. And I slipped my parachute and I came down. And when I landed, they always told us, first parachute jump ever, and they always told us to flex our legs so that you wouldn't break your knees.
Oh, yes, yes,
and,
yes.
Which we did.
Yeah.
And I went down through and I hit my head on the ground, knocked myself out. I still bear a scar from it.
Yeah.
And I was knocked out. When I woke up, I thought she was a woman, but she was a girl. Now I know, 13 years old.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she was standing there with the pitchfork that I was afraid of. So
Yeah.
I stood there and I was unbuckling my harness and trying to get rid of the parachute. And she seemed to be interested in the cloth. So I pointed to the parachute and to her, and she picked it up, and I ran for the woods. And they always told us to get in the woods. This is your only salvation.
Yeah.
And as I did, I met a young boy, I suppose 8, 10 years old, and he knew that I had been in an American plane, and he kept saying, "Vino, vino, vino," and he had a flask, I suppose, that held a couple of liters.
Yeah.
And he offered it to me, and I think I emptied it on the port cat. And then I took off. I headed for the woods, and as I got there, I was met by 2 men.
Oh.
The men were standing there with machine guns in their arms, cradled in their arms.
How were they
So,
dressed? Just ordinary clothes? Yeah.
Ordinary clothes.
They
They weren't
uniform.
military.
No,
they were not military. And they kept saying to me, "Tito, partisan, Tito, partisan, Tito, friend, Tito Amerikanski," and they would put their hands together.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't mean anything. We'd never been briefed on Tito.
No,
we
no,
didn't know who Tito was.
No. Oh,
So they started in the woods, and like I should follow them, but I didn't. I took off the other way. And they grabbed me again with their guns, and they put me between them. So I walked this time. And we walked 2 or 3 hours, and we came to a little town, village.
Yeah.
And once we arrived at the village, of course, everyone was interested in me because I was a stranger, and they knew I came out of an airplane and so on. But I had and there was no one who could speak English.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that I was not a prisoner. You know, they allowed me to roam around and move and so forth. And it was then almost supper time. And the fella came to me and he kept saying, made motions like he was going to eat. And he kept saying, "Polenta, polenta." You're frightened. I lived when I was a kid, I lived in an Italian neighborhood. So I should have known what polenta was. It's cornmeal. Mush, you know?
Yeah.
And but I kept thinking he's trying to tell me they had plenty of food.
Oh,
you know? Well, anyway, we ate. And that night I spent alone, and they were, I say alone, without the rest of my crew. And we, I slept in the priest's home. But I didn't have a guard over me, which, you know, this is uneasy. It's nice, but it's uneasy too.
Uneasy, sure, because you don't know what's going on.
And the next day, in the daytime, a couple of my crew members came into town.
Oh.
They'd been picked up by other members.
Yes, other partisans.
Other partisans. And they came in. Well, in 3 days, they had us all together, 10 of us, that they had picked us up individually. And this was April 4th, my birthday, and 21st, I'll never forget. I didn't have cake and ice cream. But we, then for those 3 days, the Germans were coming out of this town of Novo Mesto, and they had everything that was modern warfare. In those days, of course, they had tanks and trucks and modern guns and so forth. And the poor partisan, all he had was what he could steal. Maybe an old shotgun that he used to hunt with, or maybe a gun that he stole.
Now, was he fighting the Germans at this time?
They were fighting the Germans.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And they, for 3 days, the Germans were trying to go, and they were never more than 1.5 miles, which is what, a couple of kilometers from us, trying to reach us. And the Germans fought us off. And I learned in 1993 that they lost 40 men protecting us. People lost their life. Protecting us. Well, anyway, on the night of the 4th, they figured the Germans were too close to us. And they started us walking. We did most of our walking at night.
Did you? Yeah.
And they started us walking out of this little village. And again, I didn't learn it until many years later, that on April 5th, the Germans thought that we'd all be in church, and all the village would be in church.
Yes.
And at 7 o'clock in the morning, when church was on, or should have been on, they came in with Stuka dive bombers, and they dive bombed the church.
Wow.
And a 300-kilogram bomb hit the church and fell to the ground, didn't explode.
Oh
Now, you know, the Lord isn't with you here.
Yeah,
somebody is.
Yeah, somebody is.
But
yeah.
then we started walking, and we walked along, mostly at night, until April. There's a little discrepancy of a day or two, but at this point it doesn't make any difference.
No.
It was either April 10th or April 12th. We came into a little small village, much like the villages of Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And here was a man in full dress, military uniform, boots shine, and this was Major Jones.
Where you met Major Jones. Yeah.
And he told us that he was with British intelligence, and that he would, with the partisans, would travel with us and try to get us to an airport, get us flown back to Italy. And he told us to trust the partisans, not to question them. Whatever they told you to do it, because it was for your interest, not theirs.
Must have been wonderful for you guys to talk to someone now
yes,
in
it
your own
was.
language
And
that could explain the situation.
I think I should go back a little bit to the town, little town of Podgrad, where I spent my first 3 days.
Yeah.
We did meet eventually on the third day a man that could speak a little bit of English, and he told us then not to know a person, not to know a place. Because if we were captured, we were going to be tortured. And if we were tortured, we were going to tell on these people, and all of those people would be killed.
Yeah.
So you play with their rules when your life's on the line, you know?
So,
And so that's the way we operated.
Yeah.
Major Jones, on the 10th or the 12th, whichever it was like a collecting point.
Yeah.
He was there waiting for us. And at that time, our group, where we were originally 10, became 80. In fact, it was 81. And we started moving along, and it was an interesting group. Most were American airmen, but we had 3 English soldiers that had been captured in North Africa.
Now, can I go back to Major Jones for a second? He was from where? Now, you found this out much later, but I'd like to inject that here.
Yeah, Major Jones was from Bear River, Nova Scotia. And it's, if I can just expand on that a little bit, I didn't know where Major Jones was from. I just knew that he was in British intelligence. And it was in 1946, I was on local radio in Yarmouth, and I happened to mention Major Jones's name, and that he had saved us. And then a local historian in Yarmouth, his name was Arthur Thurston, he's now deceased, put a little article in the paper. Joe Maloney met Major Jones. So I went down, I spent 2 days with Arthur, and he put me in touch with Major Jones's niece, Trudy Parker, that lives in Parker's Cove, Nova Scotia, close to Bear River. And from there, Major Jones has just developed. But it was...
Now, Joe, did this Major Jones have anything to do with you coming eventually to Nova Scotia?
No.
No,
because I didn't know it until 1946. We were here. 96, I'm sorry, 96, I'm sorry.
I see.
I didn't even know where he came from.
I see.
No, he had nothing to do with it. I learned all this after I got here.
Afterward, I see,
And if I, before I go on with the story, if I would just like to explain that I think that this was a story that was destined to be told. Because from until 1990, from 1944, all I knew was I was shot down in Yugoslavia. We were there for the month of April. We were flown back to Italy. And and then when we came out, we were sworn to secrecy. We're not supposed to talk about it, who we met, where we were, and so forth. So I very seldom talk about it. In fact, my wife didn't know. She knew I was shot down. That wasn't the extent of it. In 1990, after we had moved to Nova Scotia, and moving to Nova Scotia had nothing to do with the story.
Story, I see, okay, yeah.
And we were invited to a party at Dr. Sheila Leahy's.
Yeah.
And there I was introduced to a woman
Yeah.
that said she was from Zagreb, Croatia, which was the next place to Slovenia. And she kept saying, who did you know? I said, I don't know anyone. She said, well, where were you? I said, I don't know. And her name was Anna Broadwright. And so we had her over, and she was here. Her son is a doctor in Yarmouth Hospital, still is. And she was only here for 3 weeks visiting from Zagreb. And we had her to our house 2 or 3 times, and she kept saying, if you don't know where you were, if you don't know any people, describe the country you're in.
Yeah.
So I described the country as best as I can remember, and she's amazed at my memory as to what I'd seen and what we drank.
Yeah.
And I think that's what got us through. We were probably drunk most of the time because they didn't have food, but they had wine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So she went back to Zagreb after her visit with her son. She made one phone call, and she found the people that saved us.
Yeah.
And we were invited to go over in 1992. They had a big exhibition, as they call it, a celebration. And at that time, it's when Slovenia and Croatia were splitting from Yugoslavia.
Yes.
And I was afraid to go. I
Yes.
was afraid to take my wife.
Yes,
You know, I didn't
right.
know what conditions were.
Yeah.
So we didn't go, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
We went back in 1993.
Yeah.
Ray Zink, radio journalist in Yarmouth, has since written a book about my experience, my wife and I.
Yeah.
And then it was just
This
the
is your
three-
first visit back.
first
now.
visit back. I didn't know where to go before that.
Of course. Oh, yes.
You know,
Of course.
and this is our first visit back, and we were treated like kings.
Oh, I'll bet you were.
And
Now let's go back, if
Yep.
I can. How did you get out of there finally?
well, Major Jones and the partisans started to move us south.
Yeah.
And we moved from Slovenia into Croatia and then into Bosnia.
Yeah.
We
See, those are all familiar names today, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, aren't they? Yeah.
And we traveled mostly at night, occasionally in the daytime.
Yeah.
And you couldn't talk
Yeah.
because an English voice in a country
Oh,
like
oh,
that would be
yeah.
like
Oh, it's a dead
setting off a
giveaway,
flare,
yes.
you know?
Yeah.
And on the night of April 18th, we were in Bosnia, and we started walking. We walked all night. We started when it got dusk. At about 8 o'clock in the morning, we were coming into a village. And word came ahead that we're going to have pancakes and eggs and coffee.
Oh.
This is something that, you know, is like steak and
Certainly,
French fries,
yes,
maybe.
exactly,
But it's something
yeah.
we hadn't had.
Yeah.
So we were all excited about it. But we came into this little village
Yeah.
from one side, and a German patrol came in from the other side.
Yeah.
So at that point, everybody was on their own. And then they knew we were in the area,
Yeah.
and they circled around us with these little small planes like
Yeah.
people here use now for
Yes.
sport.
Yeah.
And they were throwing hand grenades at us.
Yeah.
They were throwing machine gunning us.
Yeah.
And when they started firing a machine gun, the only thing that you would have between you and the airplane would be a tree. Is
Oh, yes,
there's a
yes,
plane
yes,
circled the
okay,
tree,
yeah.
you circled it.
Three. Yes.
And
yeah.
so we walked all that night, and
Yeah.
about, it was
Yeah.
after noontime,
Yeah.
we finally got around this village, didn't have our breakfast,
Yeah.
and we were walking down a long, straight railway,
Yeah.
or roadway, like much like the Nova Scotia, how
Yeah.
they're built up and through the lowlands. And another JU-88 came right down the road,
Yeah.
and we jumped off and laid on the side like cordwood.
Yeah.
And my radio operator and I were always together, a couple of Irishmen. His name was John Rowley. He reached over and we held hands.
Yeah.
And we said, he said to me, he said, "This is it. I'll see you in the next place." We thought we were going to be strafed and killed.
Oh, yes. Now, all right, Joe, I'm going to stop us there for now and leave Joe in a ditch with the Junkers 88, I guess, was it?
That's what it was.
It was firing at him, and we won't know how he came out of that until next time. And if you like this story, be sure and catch it again, because we will be doing the other half next time. Thank you, Joe, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching Comrades in Arms, which of course is interviews with veterans from Canada's Legion 98 in Kingston, Nova Scotia. And the purpose of these is to highlight the careers of our veterans who served in Canada's armed forces. We've been having a most interesting conversation with Joseph L. Maloney, who served with the American Air Force, but is now a Canadian, and he's telling us of his experiences when he was shot down over what used to be Yugoslavia, and he became a comrade with the partisans there, and they are helping him to escape from the country. Whether he makes it, he and his crew make it or not, we'll have to wait till next time. It's like an old-time serial we used to go to when we were kids. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'd like to thank Eastlink Communications for the wonderful job they do for us and helping us with these programs. And then I'd like to thank my producer, who goes by a different name every time, but I think this time he's Larry Caldwell. And thank you all for watching. Welcome once again to Comrades in Arms. This is a program of interviews done at Branch 98 of the Royal Canadian Legion at Kingston, Nova Scotia. And the purpose of these interviews is to highlight the careers of our veterans who served in Canada's armed forces. Well, last time we were talking to a gentleman called Joseph L. Maloney, who served with the American Air Force. He was the tail gun Charlie, and his plane was shot down over Yugoslavia. And we got to the part in the story where he is about to be helped out of the country, we hope, by the partisans. And we're going through at the moment the horrendous and harrowing experience that he and his crew had. And they're in a ditch at the moment. Junkers 88 airplane, a dive bomber, is trying to strafe them in the ditch. We don't know how they're going to come out of this, but Joe will tell us. And now we're going to pick up the story. And Joe, do you remember where you were?
Yes, I do.
All right.
We were in
You're
the ditch.
in the ditch.
But
Right.
the Ju-88 flew directly over us and didn't strafe us. So
He
that's
didn't?
why I'm able to tell you the story
Oh,
today.
very good.
But then
You
after
think he didn't see you there?
apparently he didn't.
Yeah.
He must have been goofing off.
Yes, right.
But
okay.
we got back on the road and we went along. And as we walked, we always walked 5 people in a row. And then there'd be a break. And then there'd be 5 people.
Oh, yeah.
And we, after perhaps 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we arrived at a river.
Yes.
And the Germans had a little plane patrolling the river, up and down.
Oh.
And there was a farmhouse. This is the only thing beside the river. And they timed, we could